Welcome back, everybody, to That CMMC Show. Today, I'm joined by the great and powerful Dylan Owen, CISO at Nightwing, for our new series of Conversations with a CISO. Dylan, it's nice to meet you, man. Nice to have obviously known you for a little while now. Tell a little bit about yourself and the company and kind of where you fit in the hierarchy of this fun CMMC landscape.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And thanks for having me. And again, the same, seeing you semi in person, at least virtually. I know we've traded conversation and comments, not only on the phone, but over some LinkedIn topics. So again, nice to meet you. So as you said, Dylan Owen, I'm the CISO for Nightwing. We are a spinoff from RTX, formerly known as Raytheon. And we are primarily in the, we're a defense contractor, primarily in the cybersecurity and intelligence space. So we provide, a variety of cybersecurity services across the full spectrum, from the defensive side to the offensive side, and then other services in the intelligence space, analytics, data analysis, things like that. So we've been, it's just over a year. We just celebrated our 1-year anniversary as being our own legal entity. And
Congrats. Happy birthday.
I've been working to stand ourselves up and all the IT stuff. Yeah, thanks. From kind of from scratch and all the things that go into forming a new company.
Now, we get this next question a lot, Dylan, and you and I have talked about this on the old interwebs back and forth. And you guys being a cybersecurity company, that's your kind of one of your primary focuses is delivering that service. The tension that I always hear is, Daniel, compliance does not equal security. And I would love to understand kind of where your baseline benchmark kind of in this conversation is. Does compliance, does it equal security partially, fully? What's kind of your recommendation there? What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so this is really an interesting one, because you can easily say, no, it doesn't, right?
Right.
It's just a checkbox that people do, and they don't really do anything. Or you can say, well, it actually does if you are validating and doing the things you said you did. So
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. I was reading something the other day. You may have read the same thing. Actually, it was a LinkedIn article, I think, or a comment. And somebody compared kind of the whole compliance to the building code, right?
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, I mean, you build a building, you got to have fire escapes. You wouldn't be like, oh yeah, we just POAM that away. We accepted the risk.
We POAM the fire escape.
Or, we accepted the risk of not having sprinklers in the ceiling, stuff like that. It's like, that makes no sense. But it's compliance to actually do them, because if you don't do them, your building isn't going to get approved by the building inspector, and you're going to be out, however many millions of dollars you spent building that constructing that building. It's kind of the same way in cybersecurity. We have a little more flexibility than the building code does. But to me, it's the same thing. These are basic things that you should be doing. And the real proof is verifying that I said I implemented a control in this specific way. Well, did you? So let's test it and make sure you did. Because if you don't test it, so I get the people to say, well, it doesn't equal security. It's because it probably has never been tested. And so you're just like, yeah, I just checked the box.
Yep.
Nobody checked me. Nobody verified. So yeah, it doesn't equal security. But if you add a verification behind it, it absolutely can equal some level of security, right? I am doing what I said I did, and what I did provides this type of protection, right? I implemented this control. So that's a level of security.
And that's the part that I don't think people understand is, the DFAR 7012 clause for years has been self-attesting. You get to write your own report card, right? I got an A+ here, I got a B- here, all those things. But to your point, like, compliance is only good as if there is a verification mechanism, right? And that verification mechanism, at least in the cyber compliance space, is typically kind of through the guise of third-party certifications, right? Not just self-attestation, which is where we've sat so long with CMMC. And I agree with you. That's the problem. Primarily is compliance does not equal security unless there's unbiased validation that things have been implemented correctly. Now, are the frameworks out of date? Dylan, you and I know, Rev 2's been out for God knows how many years at this point of NIST 171. Rev 3 popped out probably close to a year ago, maybe. And, yeah, the DoD is slow to adopt new frameworks because of how fast or how slow it actually takes everyone to adopt just a single version of it, right? So I agree that the latest and greatest security is typically not enforced from a compliance perspective, but a compliance is at least some kind of initial baseline. And now with CMMC requiring third-party verification for at least 2 of the levels, I think is pretty valuable. So I'm with you. I think with verification, I would tend to agree with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, honestly, while I was never on any kind of board and nobody asked my opinion from a government perspective regarding CMMC, I have been advocating something like it for a long, long time, probably since like 2008 or 9, and talking to folks that, whether it was customers I supported or just other folks, just, we need something like that. I think the other interesting thing is, there's nothing stopping you from going above and beyond.
Right.
Right. Something like a CMMC, again, basic elements.
Yep.
Do these things. Do you want to do more? Hey, go for it. Right. As long as you're not messing up a different control by doing more. There's nothing that says, well, I don't, my MFA can only be SMS. I don't know if that's really acceptable, but let's say that's what you did. There's nothing saying, well, you could do YubiKeys if you wanted, right? Passwordless, sure. So again, it's trying to set a baseline that's relatively easy to verify, right? And do that check. Because if not, if they wanted to make it really, really hard, they could say like, well, do all of 800-53.
That's right.
Right.
We're doing the high baseline. We're doing it all.
Or whatever the number is of controls. That'd be nuts.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, honestly, it could be a lot worse.
It could be. And so here's the other side of the conversation that I always find funny. So does compliance equal security? That's kind of the big tension at the top, right? That's what the 1%ers are talking about in this space. However, the majority of companies that I talk to, they're like, they can't even approach the conversation of CMMC with their executives without them being offended they have to do anything at all. So you have the far reaching of compliances and security. And then you have so many tens of thousands of companies out there that don't even know or honestly are fearful to approach this topic of CMMC with their executives to have them have to pay for anything at all, let alone just a very, what I would call semi-rudimentary baseline of cybersecurity. So you're a CISO, you get to rock the fun C title. If I was an IT director and I said, hey, Dylan, like, I need to talk to you about CMMC. What would you recommend, or what would you as a C-suite want to see from, whether it's budget or scope or data flow? Like, what would you want to see to be able to have a fruitful conversation about this particular topic? Like, how can I best empower you to help invest in this CMMC thing?
Yeah, so, there's the, I hate to put it this way, but there's the old Rahm Emanuel saying, right? Never let a good crisis go to waste. And to some degree, this is one, right?
Yeah.
Even though it's been coming for almost a decade, now that it's actually here, and if people haven't been planning, we get the whole, okay, well, it's now a crisis. It really comes down to, it's a business who want to be a defense contractor and do a certain level of work and a certain type of work. If you don't do this, you're not going to do that work. And if you want to be in the space, what do you want to be as a business, right? And I had this conversation very early on with when we first spun off and we hired a new business development director. And I met her, and she had come from another defense contractor. So she had some familiarity with CMMC. But she was asking me like, hey, where are we? What's our timeline for getting certified as at level 2? Because I've got these 10 opportunities with the DoD that I'm 99.9% sure that by the time they're ready, they'll have the CMMC clause in them. Just from a timing, right, with everything, all the different parts and pieces making it through the making process. She's like, they're going to be ready. So we got to be ready. When are we going to? So then, some of them very much understand that this is if you want to serve as a business in the DoD space, then you really don't have a whole lot of choice, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of where I approached it with our CEO and our business development folks and our CFO. The nice thing is for me, since we were spun off from an already existing defense contractor, there was already a bunch of familiarity. We get we get some pokes around some specific controls and how we've implemented them, and then it's like, well, why do we do it this way? It's like, well, there were 3 ways of doing it. We chose this way. Would you like to choose one of the other 2 ways? We can go back and look at it, type of thing. But sensitivity labels, that was one of them, right? So, hey, how come you did it this way? Why'd you pick those labels? And it's like, oh, well, we work with legal. This is what we thought were good. We can always change, but you got to do labels of some sort. So
that's true.
Again, and working with the CIO, it was, well, where are we? What are you guys doing from an IT perspective, where we can help you because you want to do X? And it's easy to point to, well, we have this requirement in CMMC to implement it this way versus that way. Or, hey, I need to justify spending 15% more for that SaaS app because it's going to store CUI and it needs to be FedRAMP moderate, right? So that's like, well, that's pretty easy. You got to be FedRAMP moderate because that's what the requirements say, and it'll enable us to do X, Y, and Z in order to protect the data. And there's other benefits that we get out of it as well. So, to me, it's that, well, what's not necessarily an ROI, because security and IT to some degree are just cost centers. Yeah, we can save some money here and there. We can enable the business in certain ways, but at the end of the day, if companies didn't have to, I mean, outside of actual laptops, no one wants to go back to stone tablets. But at the end of the day, though, we're still a cost center, and you got to make it relevant back to the business. If we were a defense contractor, why would we do CMMC? We wouldn't. But you want to be in the space, you want to win business, you want to grow. I mean, and this is our core business. Like 98% of our revenue comes from the government. And out of that, I forget how much is actual DoD specific. But if you want to grow, there really isn't a whole lot of choice. Now it comes down to what's the best way and most cost-effective way to implement the controls, right?
And that's kind of been the interesting thing is like, Rev 2 of NIST 171, which is the current for CMMC level 2, it's not prescriptive. So you have the options, right? I can do it this way, or I can do it that way. Rev 3,
Exactly.
Now that the DoD has defined the ODPs, they pulled back they pulled back your choice for a lot of these things, right? They prescribed, hey, you have to do it this way. You have to have unique identifiers for 10 years or more. Like, you have to be able to retain these records a certain amount of time. And so I always thought that was interesting too, Dylan, is like, oh, like CMMC is great because it gives companies the flexibility, but a lot of companies I found out hated that flexibility and wanted to be hyper prescribed, but now they're complaining about the prescription that they're going to have to implement here in the next year or two. So that's kind of the other interesting thing is like, it's the balance of how much is too much, how much is too little when it comes to education. And a lot of small businesses are just like, hey, just give me the template. A lot of larger organizations, or especially, companies like yours who spun off from, RTX, who has a huge defense history, they like flexibility and they know how to operate within that, right? Small businesses, they don't know how to read an ODP. They can't spell ODP for most of the reasons, So that's the interesting thing, which now that like CMMC and having that
is a big problem. I mean, but you're absolutely right. Small companies like to just be like, just tell me what to do. And, and unfortunately, whether it's the cyber IB or the DoD or whoever, because they can't really just say, oh, well, implement these products. They want to be, because they have to be product agnostic, right? That's up to the marketplace to them. Right. So they can't say, well, just do that. They might, and I haven't read all the ODPs out of Rev 3, but I know, there were some that were more of your setting has to be X. So like passwords, I think they changed to a mandatory 16 characters, which I'm like, okay, I mean, that's just an easy setting, right? But it's more like, well, how do I implement zero trust? Well, that's a good question. Don't ask any. You have to find that out on your own, unfortunately. But so I get that, because it's nice to just be like, hit the easy button, right? I buy a whole package, and it comes with all the bells and whistles that I need to meet, the right controls at the right level, and I'm done. But unfortunately, that's just not going to happen. As much as we like, even with providers that are, now you get the cottage industry of people saying, well, we'll provide you an environment that you can use. And even there, while they make it easier, and I think those are great, especially for small companies. There's still a little bit of work the company has to do. I mean, it's not a fire and forget type of thing. And I'm compliant. Yay, let's go. There's still a level of administration and some things on the back end that they have to do to enable their user, to connect and things like that. So it's never can I just pay a bill, keep my eyes closed, and just give it to somebody else to worry about, right?
It's an insurance policy, but only up until a point. You still have to do things like user training, authorization, who's doing that, vetting of new cloud providers, like you said, the list goes on and on. If somebody is promising you as a small business, hey, pay this low monthly charge of $5,000 a month and we'll take care of all of your problems, it's a little bit of a snake oil salesman, quite honestly. It has to be kind of holistic organizational adoption, because without that, you're going to fail an assessment. Like, the technology in the scheme of things is the easiest part of the equation to solve. Getting people to follow the visitor management process it's hard. Wear your badge, people. It's just all the simple things that you would think would be the easiest typically turn out to be the hardest. So with that, this is a kind of a level up, if you will, right? So in your role as CISO, you're constantly surveilling risk, right? And CMMC, like we've talked about, is a good baseline, but maybe it's not the end all be all for cybersecurity. And you guys being in that space and seeing, attacks on a daily basis, you kind of have the pulse on what's going on out there. So if I were to phone you up one day, Dylan, and say, ring, ring, hey, I've done the CMMC thing, but I really want to take it to the next level. I want to really implement some good cybersecurity above and beyond Rev 2 of NIST 800-171. What are some things that you would recommend, Dylan? Because your background's also technical, so you kind of have both sides. You have the technical side, and you now have, as an executive, that corporate risk side. So what are some things that you're seeing out there that you would recommend that people should implement from just a good cybersecurity posturing?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, there's all the basics, right? MFA, the user verification is actually becoming a big thing with all of the North Korean IT workers getting jobs at companies. It's crazy. The SIM log collection, or making sure the logs from all your systems. I know people are like, you can't collect everything because you're not going to use it. And that's true to some degree, until you have that breach and realize that the system they got into was the one you weren't collecting the logs from because you didn't think it was really useful, right? And now they're like, oh, I don't have them, or they're harder to get, and I can't correlate against all of the other things that I want to correlate against when you start doing that kind of the forensics investigation of an incident, right? There's a set of logs that are great from a security operations perspective that you can write detections against, and they're going to drive, you're having that set of logs from other things that are there from a forensics perspective could be really, really valuable, and could end up giving you turns into, well, how do we fix that so the bad guys don't get in the next time, right? In terms of all of the bells and whistles, I am huge though on stick to the basics until your maturity level matrix similar to CMMI. If you're at 3 or 4 in your basic operations and you've done all of the really good basic cyber hygiene things, MFA and EDR, and you've got things being monitored, and you've got your operations down, then you can start looking at what are the advanced things inside your operations. So some people might look at like threat hunting, right?
Yeah.
That's a relatively advanced thing, and you need some other things in place in order to really enable that. That's a high maturity thing to implement. Threat intelligence, people like to talk about, well, it's a necessity today, and sort of. I think there's a level of threat intelligence that is useful, but really good mature organizations, threat intelligence is kind of further along when you get to maturity, because the ability to operationalize what you're getting from, I've joined 10 different organizations and they're all sending me these threat feeds, and to be able to dedupe all that information and then give it to somebody who can analyze it and figure out, well, do I need to care about it? Because 75% of what you get, you probably don't need to care about. It's not really relevant to your organization. It's kind of, there's an adjacent vertical maybe that gets it. So like we look a lot at financial service companies and the threat intelligence coming out from the FSISAC, even though we're in the defense contractor space, because they tend to use a lot of the same techniques. So there's adjacent market things that are useful for an organization, but then there's just a lot of noise, and it takes a lot of time and expertise to be able to use and operationalize threat intelligence appropriately.
Well, and that's why people call you guys up, right? They're like, hey, we need bodies and people that can do that.
You don't really need it at the base. Need small things here and there. Like, okay, be a junior member or whatever, so you can get some of the basics out of people who are in your industry. But I wouldn't go out and spend, $500,000 on 15 different threat feeds up front. That's 2-3 years down the line as your maturity gets higher as an organization, and you can actually do something with it and make it meaningful. So I see a lot of wasted money that way.
I do too. I see people going out and buying products because it's a sure thing, or something they think that they need, and it turns out no, how about you just start reviewing logs? Let's start there, right? And then let's look at some more modernization of things. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wouldn't, again, I wouldn't, for probably 90% of the companies out there, I wouldn't worry about really going too above and beyond what's already there. Again, get the basics in place, run them for a year, 2 years, right? See where your gaps are, and then start to move. Maybe I need file integrity monitoring across all of my things, all of my assets, instead of just my 4 that hold my crown jewels, because that's the ones I really care about. So, there's a lot of just, oh, I should really be doing this. It's like, yeah, but are you really mature enough to use it? And what does it add if you're already doing the basics?
Yep. Right there with you. Which this next topic's kind of an interesting one. So you and I both know about FedRAMP, right? FedRAMP authorization. Yep. It's required for DFAR 7012. It's required for CMMC level 2, a FedRAMP moderate, or the tricky word, moderate equivalent cloud provider, or CSP. Now, I've heard some horror stories of people using equivalent clouds at a moderate level that they were compliant for a few months and then they lost it, in the sense of they weren't doing something and they ended up with something on their POAM, which equivalency doesn't really allow for that. So what's been your kind of perspective of this, Dylan? Are you seeing large adoptions of equivalency clouds? Would you recommend it? What's kind of your general stance on it, on, maybe your organization or other organizations that you support?
Yeah. So, honestly, I thought they weren't even allowing equivalency. I thought the memo that came out, I forget when was it, the end of 2024?
January of last year, I think. Yeah.
From the DoD on equivalency. I thought it basically said I thought they basically said you can't do it. I could be wrong. It's been a while, but I don't really believe in the equivalency concept, to be honest. We do look at it on a case-by-case basis. So just like a lot of other organizations, or maybe not, we do a vetting of all SaaS providers that we're going to use, and what data is going to be stored there. If it's going to be CUI, do they have FedRAMP options? If they don't, maybe they are an equivalent. Well, what are they really doing? Are they on the roadmap? Like, is it they just haven't gotten through the queue of FedRAMP, but they've done some of the processing. Like if you go to the FedRAMP marketplace, are they listed somewhere? But in general, because of what you mentioned, and that, oh yeah, I had equivalency and then something changed and now I've completely lost it. And like, well, that's a problem. We tend to not go the equivalent route. It's FedRAMP moderate minimum, or we're doing something different, right?
Yep.
Even if that means we're going to self-host it in our cloud that's FedRAMP moderate, or even we have some high stuff as well. So it's like, yeah, not a big proponent or believer in the equivalency piece of it.
I don't really think the DoD is that big of a proponent of either. I think they would rather get it out.
Yeah, but again, I think it's just too big of a risk, because if things change in a way that now affects your ability to really use them, I mean, then what?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, DoD. I mean, again, it goes back to back to the kind of the compliance equals or doesn't equal security piece. Well, I've gone through my audit.
Yep.
And now one of my cloud things changes. Well, I should have to go back and report that and say, hey, something changed, or my source should probably change. Right? So, and that's why, to me, it's just too big of a risk. Why would you do that when, if you're in that FedRAMP space, anything that they roll out, well, they can't roll it out until it's FedRAMP authorized anyway. So yes, is it bad that that feature you really want isn't available? Yeah, but we wait. And I will say, some vendors have been doing a much better job in prioritizing their FedRAMP instances for new features, because they realize where part of their customer base is, and that customer base is going to be growing, right?
Yep.
So all these defense contractors that have been using commercial instances of things for the last 10 years and now realize they have to go to FedRAMP. And if their vendor's like, oh, I don't have a FedRAMP, well, they're going to lose that business. And oh, well, that feature wasn't available in FedRAMP. Well, you might lose that business to a different vendor who's in FedRAMP who does have the features that I want. So, I think it's going to become even more competitive on the vendor side on how fast can they get features that are available in commercial into their FedRAMP offerings, and make that a faster turnaround.
I'm with you on it. I'm already seeing it. I mean, spam filters, for example, right? Oh, we need FedRAMP moderate spam filters. Oh, we need EDR tools that are FedRAMP moderate because they do sandboxing in their cloud, or fill in the blank, right? I mean, there's so many SaaS applications, collaboration services, and you name it. Especially since Microsoft dropped their FedRAMP for commercial, like altogether. Right. I mean, you have to have compliant collaboration services as part of that. And CSPs and are one thing. The other kind of pivot to this is not only the CSP space, but because you guys are an MSSP yourselves, your customer just happens to primarily be federal agencies and the DoD. One of the big requirements out for what's referred to as ESPs, which could be an MSP or an MSSP servicing a defense contractor, is things like a customer responsibility matrix. But one thing that people don't talk about are their tools FedRAMP, right? Because if they're processing, storing, or transmitting CUI on your behalf, they also have to meet that requirement. So what are some recommendations for the businesses out there that are listening in? What are some recommendations on vetting a service provider that is providing daily, weekly, monthly support, either on the cybersecurity side or even just the general day-to-day IT support side? Any recommendations on vetting there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. One obviously is, well, what other customers in this space do you have, right? If I'm your only one, that might be a problem just from a support, and is their infrastructure really set up to handle me? But if they're handling 40 or 50, right, small to mid-sized defense contractors, then they probably have a pretty good handle on what the requirements are. So that's one, is like, what is their real customer base? I think the delivery model is an important one, right? So whose tools are being used? Is it their tools? So our MSSP is a little flexible. We have our own tech stack. and there are FedRAMP instances of that tech stack. If the customer either doesn't want to use their own or wants to move away from what they're currently using and just want to completely outsource that, and we can handle that. But honestly, most of our customers already have a tech stack in place and want us to use it. So, they just basically provide remote access, and we're no different than an employee on their network, right?
Yeah.
So it makes it a lot easier, right? Because they're actually taking a lot of the burden themselves, because it's their network, it's their tools. We're just a provider. We're just giving them, a lens into their systems, maintaining them, but it's all on their network. Sometimes they even give us company assets. Sometimes it's just we VPN into a VDI pool. So there's not a whole lot that we actually, but that delivery model is really, really important, because, if someone's going to say, well, give us all your data and you'll use our tools, well, then you got to make sure that everything they're doing is above board and meets the CMMC compliance piece. But if it's, well, I just need someone who's going to use my tools, it can make it an easier selection and opens up the aperture a little bit there. Because as long as nothing's leaving your network, then it's my controls, right? My set of controls, I control it all. And again, we have most of our customers actually like that model, mainly because they've developed over the years and they've bought their tools and they like their tools. They just need some extra expertise and honestly a little bit more manpower than they're able to go and hire. So we do a lot of that augmentation type of work. But again, we do have a tech stack that we have a handful of companies that use, and we have FedRAMP. This is one of the conscious decisions we made with all of the tools that we picked for our tech stack, was to make sure there was a FedRAMP offering available for either defense contractors or agencies that wanted to work with us, differently than what most agencies, how they contract for cyber services, right? So we have them and they're available, and and that group, it's a different group, obviously, and they're working through what they need to do from a CMMC perspective. But those are the two big things, right? Who's your customer base and what's the delivery model? I think if you can figure that out and get the answers you want, then that's going to go a long way into getting you someone who's going to help you out in the long run. Because those are also to me like the two biggest problems.
Well, and that's what I found out. So I was talking to a company probably no more than like 3 weeks ago, and they had homegrown or self-deployed all of the traditional MSP tools from within inside of their company, because they had been burned twice by using a third party's MSP tool sets because they weren't vetted. And the first time they vetted them for FedRAMP, and the first MSP was able to meet that. But guess what? The next MSP was using non-US persons to provide outsourced support to help out that MSP. They had export control data. That's a problem. And so then they just said, forget it. We're gonna basically host all the tools ourselves, and we're just gonna require, if an MSP wants to work with us, to do staff aug. And that's a significant investment in an organization to be able to buy, deploy, and manage those tool sets, and then just to hire out bodies to help support it. It's definitely a model for sure.
Honestly, we see that a lot. The U.S. persons is a big thing too. I mean, that was another conscious decision that we made, and it wasn't that hard, just because when we were part of RTX, we kind of had to. But the whole U.S. person, only CONUS support, huge, right? And that's been a problem. Some of these larger, some of the more commercial players, right, who have the full global operations and a SOC in 17 countries, and they do a follow the sun model. Well, that's probably not going to work for a defense contractor with CMMC requirements, right? So that's certainly a conversation to have as well. Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to get you at another one here, Dylan. So you've talked to assessors before, you've talked to implementers before, you've kind of been in the space for a while. I'm a company, I'm a 50-person company, I'm a 100-person company, I'm a 500-person company, right? What questions should I be asking? And I think you already highlighted one really good one, basically being, do you have other clients like me, right? Defense contractors. But what are some recommendations and other questions you might throw out there if you're trying to hire a third-party implementer or a third-party assessor? Any recommendations or questions from an interview perspective that you'd recommend people going through?
Yeah, especially on the assessor side, right? Obviously, they've gone through the cyber AD and they've been vetted and they're a member of that marketplace and they have all the right certifications that are required. You'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, on people who are just like, yeah, no, we can still do it. I think experience in the space overall, and I don't mean just CMMC, right? So has the company done FedRAMP or ISO
Yeah.
or iTrust or any of these other
Yep.
frameworks that are out there? Because that experience is really, really valuable just to know, like, okay, they know how to do an audit in general, right? What's the process? So if we're going out and we want to hire somebody who's more on the implementer or consulting side, how do they run? What do they do? Right? Is
Yep.
it, do they come on site? Is it all virtual? Do we, how do we share documents with them? Because I'm providing some sensitive information to them. We
Right.
want to make sure that's secure as well. So, you know, do they have like a formal structure, or is it, well, we kind of wing it. What do you guys have? That tends to not go well with me if it's kind of like, well, we're really, really flexible. It's like, okay, but what do you really do? So I
Yeah.
personally like something that's a lot more formal. Hey, we have an SFTP service set up, and this is what we do, and we give you accounts, and we come on site for 2 weeks, and we need to talk to these people, and then after those 2 weeks, it's we can do it remote, and then we'll come back on site for another week to kind of wrap things up. I mean, that shows a company that is invested in how they deliver their services, right? Instead
Yep.
of, well, it depends. I don't think I think for a lot of this, it doesn't depend, and you can set a
Right.
very nice laid out plan, right? Um, so those are kind of the big ones. What's their experience like? Do they seem like they have a plan, that they're organized? They've got structure to what they're doing. Also, don't tell me you can do it in 5 days. Uh,
You see, you took the words out of
so,
my
so
mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say,
a level
Dylan.
of
Same thing.
realism in the timeline needs to be there.
Yes.
And then what are they
And
going to give
people
you
don't
back?
realize that
Is
there's
it
there's real backlogs. The people that know how to do this are gonna have a backlog. It's just kind of the
oh
nature.
yeah,
If you're an expert in something, there's gonna be a line. My favorite roller coaster at Six Flags always has a line because it's the best roller coaster. You know what I mean? The wooden roller
absolutely.
coaster, nobody wants to be on that thing. I could ride that thing 30 times and there would never be a line. But it's one of
Yeah.
those things where
I
the
mean, we're looking
quality.
at C3PAOs right now. Yeah. So we're looking at C3PAOs now, and the schedule is fourth quarter, late fourth
Yep,
quarter for for
for the
for
good
most
ones.
companies, right? And they're
Yeah.
like, oh well, if we have a cancellation, we might be able to squeeze you in. But yeah, I mean, and there's a backlog across, and it's not just there's a lot of companies that want this, obviously, that want a CMMC assessment. And then there's when they changed the rules with the how many people had to be on the assessment team, kind of threw a
Mhm.
little bit of a wrench. I think companies were
Yep.
planning on that 2-man team, and now it's a 3-man team. So they either need to shift resources or hire some more people, and then that takes time to get people, the right people. You got to get them through some training. So absolutely, there's a backlog there. But I was going to say that the other thing that's really important is, what is the deliverable from this engagement? Um, am I, if I'm working with a consultant type and I'm doing kind of a pre-assessment, am I going to get like the shell of an SSP that I can use with a lot of the things already filled in?
Yep.
Is it going to be a report? Is it a PowerPoint? Is it a PowerPoint and a Word document and whatever? If I'm working with an implementer, am I going to get architecture diagrams, design guides, high level design, low level design, system administrator guides? Like, that stuff's really, really important, because when they leave, I'm
Yep.
now responsible for running the whole thing. So how do I do that? If I don't have those documents, available, at least as a baseline. Obviously things change, you know, the minute you set something up. Oh, I had to change that for whatever reason. Cool, but you can handle that. But if you don't have that baseline documented, then you're not going anywhere. Right?
Yep.
That's a real problem. So I think that's the last thing is kind of, you know, what is that set of deliverables, and do they meet your objectives?
Good question. And if they don't, move on to the next one. And you might have to
Absolutely.
sacrifice your timeline. You know, if people are late getting to the CMMC party, I tell people it's like you can be early to CMMC, you can be late, but you can't be on time. So many people have tried to time the perfect
Yeah.
CMMC thread the needle moment. And now they're finding out, oh, those implementers that I wanted to use, those assessors I wanted to use, they're booked out 6, 8, 9, 10, 12 months from now, potentially, right? And that's kind of the hard part. I mean, it's you've got to come to the realization that you might have missed the boat and you're going to be later to CMMC at this point than you think you're going to be. And having that conversation with an executive is way harder than saying, "Hey, we got there a little bit early," right? Which, you know, a lot of the
Absolutely.
early
Yeah.
adopters have been able to do. But well, with all that being said, Dylan, I always like
Just
ending.
real quick, this is not day trading. To your point, right?
This
You
is
can't be
not
on
day trading. That's
you
right.
can't sit there and time the market on CMMC, right? To your point, you're going to be there when you're going to be there, and if you moved early, you're going to be in a better place than, you know, even today. If you're just starting today, you're right. It's next year before you're going to get anything done, more than likely.
100%.
So absolutely can't time this market.
You cannot time this market. No matter how much you want to buy the dip, guess what? It don't work like that. So, so I like to end every podcast with closing remarks, Dylan. So if you were to tell your supply chain, tell companies pursuing CMMC, you name it, what are some closing remarks and wisdom that you would give to them before we wrap up today?
I don't know how wise this is, but it's kind of the stuff we've talked about, right? Don't If you haven't started, start immediately. Have those
Yep.
conversations. You know, go and grab resources off of the Cyber AB site, from the DoD CIO's office site. You know, find somebody who knows 800-171 like the back of their hand, um, who can help you internally, whether that's an outside consultant or someone you hire. You know, the guy I've got on my team is phenomenal, and he guides me because I can't, with everything else I have to worry about, I can't memorize all of the controls. I know
Right.
enough for him to tell me I'm wrong, uh, but it's really really key to have a trusted person, whether it's on staff or an outside consultant, who really really knows and can help and evaluate. Hey, we implemented a control this way. Do we think that's gonna, you know, not only is it going to meet the control objective, but this is
Yeah.
what I found is also really important. How are you documenting and showing that you've met that control objective? Is it just
Hmm.
words on a piece of paper? Do you have screenshots? You know, an auditor may want you to pull up your EDR console and show you, you know, all of the machines that have it installed and that checked in the last 5 days.
Yep.
They could. So it's not just about I wrote down how I'm implementing the control. It's where's the evidence and how are you going to show that auditor is really really key. And somebody who knows the controls, can help you evaluate how are you going to provide the evidence.
Yep.
That's actually like 75% of the job there. So, you know, find somebody you trust. Start now if you haven't started. If you're already on your way, great. I would also say do some interim self assessments. We did a level 1 assessment you know, on our own like 2 months ago, which was really really valuable in pointing out some gaps. And so we're doing another, level 2 kind of style assessment with a third party right now, which is helpful. So, you know, we identified some gaps from the level 1 now, but we were able to use a lot of that documentation and information for the level 2, and now the level 2 is going to help us. And, you know, when we finally hit a milestone from an architecture and an IT perspective later this year, we're going to do another mini level 2 assessment to see what changed between now and September. But I would do that quite often
Yep.
if you can. Do these little, and even if it's just one control family, you don't have to do all 110 controls. Pick one control family and just do a little assessment. Where are we? Right? What evidence do I have? Do I think I could pass an audit here? And I think the other kind of big piece of advice is rope people in. CMMC is not just a cyber problem, right?
That's 100% right.
Right? IT is involved. Okay, cool. They're tech folks, but there's non-tech folks. Our finance team has to be involved. HR is absolutely 100% involved in a whole slew of controls around access control and employee onboarding. Your personnel security folks are involved, right? Not only from how do you vet your employees, especially those that are going through clearances, it's pretty simple. Hey, they go through the government clearance process, but there's also insider threat and a bunch of other physical security of your spaces. So this is not just a cyber problem. Try to bring in those business leaders as often as you can. We do quarterlies with our business leaders, and then we do monthlies with a smaller group of folks. But just so A, they're aware, and B, what support do we need from them to get through this? And so, we've set some timelines and goals, and trying to meet those. It's like, hey, we need help here if we're going to meet this, because we know this RFP is coming out. It's going to have CMMC in it, and if we're not ready, we could lose, $1 billion business.
Yep.
And that's not good.
That's not good. That's the one risk you don't want to go to the CEO with and say, oh yeah, we have a contingency where we might not win this $1 billion contract. It's like, let's see what we can do to figure that one out. Well, Dylan, thank you for your time, sir. This has been great. Thank you for all your insight from your position and your background. This has been fantastic. So thanks everyone for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode that we're going to have. If you have any recommendations, feel free to leave us a comment. We'll interview just about anybody that wants to talk. So thank you guys again, and thanks for watching, and have a good day, everybody.